He told me it was nothing personal, just numbers on a spreadsheet. We can hire 3 fresh grads for what we pay you, the new CTO said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't even pretend to hide the satisfaction in delivering the blow. After nearly 2 decades of service, that was how it ended. My name's Victor Hale. I'm 55 years old, and for the past 18 years, I have been the lead systems engineer at Veltria Housing, once known as Bayview Properties. When I joined, they had barely any IT infrastructure, a couple of desktops, a fax machine, and a dial-up connection that could barely handle email. Now, thanks in large part to my work, they run a fully integrated digital management system supporting dozens of properties across multiple states. So that morning, I found myself sitting in a brightly lit conference room across from Graham Vickers, the newly appointed Chief Technology Officer. Graham was a polished man, tailored suit, perfect part in his hair, and expensive eyewear that screamed elite business school. He'd been with the company for all of 6 months. From the moment he arrived, he made it clear he was there to streamline operations. I should have known what that meant. Diane from Human Resources sat beside him. Her tone was practiced, rehearsed. She slid a folder across the glossy table. This is your severance package. 2 months pay plus your unused vacation. We're also open to discussing a short-term consulting role to assist with the handover. I didn't even open the folder. Is that all? I asked. Graham looked mildly annoyed, like he'd been denied some expected resistance. I think he wanted a scene, yelling, a refusal to sign, threats of legal action. Something to justify the decision, to say to the board, see, he was difficult, but I didn't give him the satisfaction. No questions, he asked. I shrugged. Not really. Seems like you've made up your mind. His eyes met Diane's. Neither of them understood. They thought I was calm. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't calm. I was finished. There's a difference. My loyalty had been spent over the last 2 decades, bit by bit, and there was nothing left for me to give. Graham pressed on, clearly trying to manage the narrative. We'd still appreciate your guidance during the transition. Perhaps a few weeks of consulting just until the new team is fully up to speed. I'll consider it, I said. I knew I wouldn't. I stood, shook both their hands, and walked out. I returned to my office, filled a single cardboard box with what remained of 18 years of professional life, some notebooks, a framed picture, a few awards collecting dust. No one stopped me. A few coworkers offered awkward nods or avoided eye contact entirely. I didn't blame them. They were just trying to survive, same as I was. In the elevator, I felt the weight of time. Not sadness, not anger, just weight. The weight of knowing I had been deemed too expensive. The weight of understanding that experience, at least to some, was no longer a virtue. It was a liability. Outside in the parking garage, my phone buzzed. Text from Ellen. Vic, the whole team's freaking out. Can we talk? I didn't reply. Driving home. I didn't turn on the radio. I let silence keep me company. When I reached my house, I went straight to the back deck. The sun was beginning to fall behind Lake Ontario, casting gold across the water. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat watching the light fade. Elaine, my wife, came out and sat beside me, her hand rested gently on my shoulder. What now? She asked softly. I exhaled. Something will turn up. And I meant it. Not with blind hope, but with quiet confidence. I had built something meaningful. Whether they valued it or not, it didn't change that fact. What they didn't realize, but Graham had never bothered to find out, was that the system they ran on wasn't just complex, it was personal. It carried my fingerprints on every line of code, every workaround, every undocumented protocol I had created because management had never approved a proper documentation. And now they would discover what that really meant. Back when I joined, the company wasn't even called Veltria. It was Bayview Properties, a modest real estate firm based in upstate New York with just 4 apartment complexes under management and barely a dozen full-time employees. The office was tucked into a shared strip of leased space behind a dry cleaner and an insurance agency. There was no IT department, just 2 aging desktop computers and a fax machine that jammed more often than it worked. The owner, Harold Bay, had hired me away from a consulting contract I'd picked up in Syracuse. He'd said, "We're expanding and we need someone to help us build something solid." He couldn't offer the biggest salary, but I saw an opportunity not just to build systems, but to build a legacy. In the early days, I did everything. I set up the first internal network, sourced hardware from local suppliers, and wrote simple scripts to automate rent reminders and maintenance logs. I learned where every file was stored and what each employee needed to work efficiently. We didn't have processes, we had people, and I made it my job to support them. Over time, I started developing what would eventually become a full-fledged property management platform. First, it was tenant application tracking, then background check integration. Soon after, I automated maintenance ticketing and routed it to contractors by region. Piece by piece, the system grew, always customized, always responsive to the company's evolving needs. Within 5 years, Bayview had doubled its properties. By the 10-year mark, they'd expanded into 2 neighboring states. We went from 2 desktops and a printer to a networked operation with 24/7 uptime, remote property access, mobile interfaces for field agents, and integrated payment systems. Never had a team. Budgets were always tight, so I built, tested, deployed, and fixed things myself. I didn't complain. In fact, I took pride in how efficiently we operated. My code ran lean. My systems had multiple layers of failover, and I could resolve most issues before anyone noticed they existed. I became, in the eyes of many, invisible, which is often the curse of doing your job too well. When Harold retired 5 years ago, his son Justin stepped in. Within a year, he sold the company to a private equity firm that promised modernization, growth, and professionalization. They've rebranded us as Veltria Housing. At first, they seemed genuinely impressed with what I had built. One executive even called it shockingly sophisticated for an internal tool. But that praise came with strings. The new leadership brought in consultants, guys with expensive shoes and buzzwords like cloud transformation, scalability, and standardization. They listened politely while I explained the uniqueness of our system and the reasons why certain parts had to be custom. Then they nodded and suggested we just migrate everything to some SaaS solution they were pushing. When I proposed hiring a small documentation team to begin mapping out the system, something I'd requested for years, I was told it was too expensive. Next quarter, they said. That quarter never came. Instead, more consultants showed up, MBA types who didn't understand how our system worked or why it mattered. I tried to explain. I walked them through dependencies, custom APIs, middleware patches, and bespoke automation routines that saved us tens of thousands of dollars annually. Their eyes glazed over. Then they stopped inviting me to meetings altogether. Elaine noticed it before I did. One evening over dinner, she said, "They're phasing you out." I shook my head. "They can't. No one else knows the system like I do." "That might be why they want you gone," she replied. At first, I dismissed her warning. But soon after, I started seeing the signs. Graham was brought in as the new CTO, and his first move was to bring in 3 junior engineers fresh out of university. He said it was to support modernization efforts. They shadowed me for a few weeks, asking questions. I answered, but it was clear they weren't grasping the architecture. How could they? The system was complex because the business was complex, and that complexity had grown organically over nearly 2 decades. There were layers within layers, fail-safes I'd implemented during crises, security loops to protect tenant data, and cross-platform connectors built long before APIs were standard. The juniors were smart, but they lacked context, and context is everything. Then came the quarterly review. Graham invited me to a routine check-in. I should have seen it for what it was, but after 18 years, you stop expecting knives in your back. You expect your work to speak for itself. Turns out, sometimes your work only whispers. The shift didn't happen overnight. It began subtly, little changes here and there, easy to ignore if you weren't paying close attention. At first, it was the way project priorities were discussed. Instead of long-term stability and system reliability, the conversations shifted to buzzwords: quarterly gains, operational efficiency, and low-hanging fruit. I started noticing how often phrases like cost-benefit ratio or strategic scalability were thrown around, usually by people who couldn't write a single line of code but carried executive titles that made them feel like architects of progress. The new management didn't want evolution. They wanted transformation, the kind that looked great in investor presentations and internal newsletters. I pushed back, not loudly, not emotionally, just with logic, numbers, and facts. When one consultant proposed replacing our custom-built tenant portal with a flashy third-party system, I walked him through why it wouldn't integrate with our legacy infrastructure. I showed him the custom scripts that connected back-end payment processing to the maintenance scheduler and how replacing just one module would break that handshake. He nodded, said he'd take it under advisement, and then recommended the exact same product in his report. Soon after, I noticed that I was no longer invited to key meetings. At first, I assumed it was an oversight. Then it became a pattern. Budget talks, strategic planning, vendor selection, I was left out of all of them. When I asked Graham about it, he smiled and said, "We're just exploring options. We'll loop you in when necessary." I knew what that meant. I've seen it before in other companies. You don't fire someone outright. You make them irrelevant. You isolate them from influence, strip their input, and when they finally disengage out of exhaustion, you say, they weren't a team player. The irony, I had never been more of a team player. I had kept the entire digital foundation of this company alive, alone, for nearly 2 decades. I'd never demanded promotions or big raises. I trained new hires, patched issues at 2 a.m., and handled outages before the execs even noticed. I was the system, but I had no documentation team, no successor, no redundancy. That had always been the problem, and now I realize the company saw it not as a flaw in their planning, but as my strategic maneuvering. As if I had deliberately made myself indispensable. Elaine brought it up again one night. "They've put you in a corner," she said, as we ate dinner on the back porch. "I've seen corners before," I replied. "This one has a lock on the outside," she added. She was right. I just didn't want to believe it yet. Then came Graham's juniors. They were smart kids, eager, energetic, probably underpaid. I didn't blame them for trying to understand a system they hadn't built. I answered their questions, showed them architecture maps, and gave them access to non-critical scripts. But most of what they asked made it obvious that they didn't understand what they were dealing with. You can't reverse engineer an 18-year-old custom system built by one person while keeping it operational. It's like trying to take apart a jet engine while it's mid-flight and hoping you can reassemble it before the next fuel cycle. One of the juniors asked me, "Why is there a dual redundancy in the backup routines for maintenance data?" I smiled. "Because once, during a power outage, our data center failed over incorrectly, and a contractor erased all pending maintenance requests across 3 states. So now there's a checksum validator in place that cross-references entries from both backup nodes. No one asked me to build it. I just didn't want that happening again." He blinked, unsure how to respond. That's when I knew they weren't replacing me, they were removing me and hoping nothing important broke before they figured it all out. It was a dangerous gamble, but I wasn't going to stop them. I had tried repeatedly. I had written proposals, submitted cost analysis, and warned about single points of failure. No one listened. When you ignore the only person holding the keys to your kingdom, eventually that door is going to slam shut. And I had just placed my hand on the handle. I should have seen it coming. When Graham scheduled a quick check-in for the following morning, he made it sound routine, just a casual catch-up, but there was a shift in his tone, a deliberate calmness, the kind of people use when they're about to deliver bad news but want to seem reasonable. The meeting took place in conference room B, not his office, not mine. Neutral ground, the kind of space used when HR needs to witness something. Diane was already seated when I arrived. Her presence confirmed everything. Grant opened a leather-bound notebook, more for show than substance. "Victor," he began, "let me start by saying how much we appreciate the work you've done over the years." I nodded. "Cut to it." He cleared his throat. "As you know, the company is refocusing its resources. With current economic conditions and our goal to modernize, we've had to make some difficult decisions." I waited. "Your position has been deemed redundant." He said it as if reading off a memo. No hesitation, no personal note, just policy. The cold efficiency of it made me want to laugh. Diane slid a folder across the table like it was a menu. This outlines your severance, 2 months of base pay, and all accrued vacation. There's also an option to consult during the transition period if you're open to it. I didn't even glance at the papers. That's all? I asked. Graham leaned forward slightly. We assumed you might have questions. I don't. He blinked. Diane fidgeted with a pen. I added, you've made your decision. There's nothing left to clarify. Graham paused, clearly thrown off by my composure. I think he was expecting a reaction. Defensiveness, anger, bargaining. That's the mistake people make when they underestimate engineers. We don't explode. We analyze, adapt, and move on. Well, he said, recovering, we would appreciate your help in transitioning the knowledge to the new team. A consulting arrangement, maybe just for a few weeks. I'll think about it, I said, though we both knew I wouldn't. I stood, shook their hands, and left the room without looking back. My office felt smaller than usual when I returned. I packed slowly, not from reluctance, but because I had to decide what mattered enough to take. 18 years of my life in this room, yet it all fit into one cardboard box. A couple of plaques, some old notebooks, and a backup USB drive I wouldn't use again. A photo of Elaine and me at the 10-year company retreat. On my way out, a few colleagues crossed my path. Some offered polite smiles. Others looked down, unsure of what to say. No one offered help. No one asked what happened. But I didn't blame them. They were scared. Fear eats empathy. The parking garage was quiet. My truck sat in the same spot it always had, level 2A. As I placed the box on the passenger seat, my phone buzzed. Text. From Alan. Vix, everyone was panicking. What the hell happened? I didn't respond. Not because I was angry. I just didn't have the energy to reassure anyone else. Back home, I walked straight to the back deck. The lake was calm, a pale mirror under the setting sun. The bourbon was already in the cabinet. I poured a glass, sat down, and watched the horizon shift from gold to violet. Elaine joined me a few minutes later. She didn't say anything at first, just placed her hand gently on my shoulder. What now? She asked quietly. I took a long sip before answering. I don't know. Something will turn up. And I meant it, not out of blind optimism, but because I understood my value. I wasn't just an engineer. They had built an empire on my architecture. Every system that still functioned inside Veltria bore my fingerprints. Every integration, every custom tool, every silent failsafe, I designed them all. What Graham hadn't understood, what he had never cared to ask, was that firing me wasn't like letting go of an employee. It was like yanking out the foundation and hoping the house wouldn't notice. They hadn't just let me go. They removed the only person who truly understood how everything worked. And now they would learn the price of that decision. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. 2 weeks after I left, I was at home updating my resume when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but the voicemail that followed gave it away instantly. Victor, this is Graham. We're having a bit of trouble with the tenant portal. The junior team's looking into it, but they're having some difficulty understanding parts of your architecture. Would you mind giving us a quick call back? Just a brief consultation, 10 minutes tops. I didn't call back. I listened to the message twice, then hit delete. 2 hours later, another call, then another. By the end of the day, I had 4 voicemails from different numbers, each one more frantic than the last. The final message that evening came not from Graham, but from Alan, the database administrator I'd hired over a decade ago. Text message. Vic, system's been down all day. Maintenance requests won't be processed. Graham's losing it. I stared at the screen, took a sip of coffee, and said nothing. The next morning, HR got involved. Diane, her voice overly cheerful, left a voicemail. Victor, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to reach out on behalf of the leadership team. We'd love to discuss a temporary consulting arrangement with you. The compensation would be quite generous. I waited until after lunch before calling back. How generous? I asked. $300 an hour, minimum 4-hour engagements, she replied without hesitation. I'll think about it, I said, then hung up. I didn't need the money. That wasn't the point. Later that day, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table staring at the lake. Elaine placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of me without saying a word. "What are you thinking?" she finally asked. "I'm thinking they're learning what I'm worth." Over the next 3 days, the calls kept coming. Graham, Diane, even Justin Bayou, Harold's son, who was still on the board despite selling the company. Like, the system was failing. The tenant portal wouldn't load. The maintenance scheduler was throwing errors. The auto payment service had stopped processing entirely. Thousands of residents were impacted. And I wasn't surprised. They never understood how critical the underlying redundancies were, how carefully each layer of automation had been threaded together. It wasn't just about code, it was about continuity. And they'd never invested in the things that could preserve it. By the fourth day, I received an email from a name I hadn't seen in years, Lawrence Devlin, Director of Technology at Devlin Systems. They were a smaller regional competitor, but one I'd always respected. Email from Lawrence. "Victor, I recently heard about your situation with Veltria. We've long admired the work you did over there. If you're open to a conversation, I'd love to discuss an opportunity with you. We're preparing for a major infrastructure upgrade, and I believe your expertise could be exactly what we need." I read the email twice, then scheduled a meeting. That evening, while Elaine and I were making dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Graham Vicker standing on my porch. His designer glasses were crooked, his suit jacket wrinkled, and his usual poise noticeably absent. "Victor," he said, slightly breathless, "I'm sorry for showing up like this, but we have a critical situation. The entire system is down, nothing is working, the team is stuck, and we're bleeding tenants." I leaned against a door frame. "That sounds serious?" "It is. We need your help. The board has approved emergency funds for a top-tier consulting rate. $500 per hour. Whatever it takes." Thought about the cardboard box in my garage, the one that held 18 years of my work. I thought about the phrase Graham had used just weeks ago. Nothing personal, just cost-cutting. I thought about the documentation team I'd asked for and been denied every single year. "I'm sorry to hear you're struggling," I said quietly. "I've got an interview tomorrow. Something will turn up." Then I closed the door and went back to chopping vegetables. It wasn't revenge. It was a boundary. For the first time since that termination meeting, I felt peace. Not triumph. Not satisfied. Just peace. The next day, I met Lawrence Devlin at a quiet coffee shop in downtown Rochester, far from both Veltria and Devlin Systems offices. It was neutral ground, which I appreciated. I didn't want to walk into a boardroom or face a panel of recruiters. I wanted a conversation. Lawrence arrived exactly on time. He was older than I remembered. Maybe early 60s now, with a neatly trimmed beard and the kind of calm demeanor that came from surviving long enough in tech to know when not to panic. "Victor," he said, offering his hand. "Glad you could make it." "Appreciate the invite," I replied, shaking it firmly. We sat in a quiet corner with our coffees, no laptops, no presentations, just two engineers in plain clothes talking shop. "I followed your work for years," Lawrence said, stirring cream into his cup. "That integrated platform you built at Veltria, it's the stuff of legend in our circles. People say it ran smoother than most commercial options on the market." "It took time," I said, simply. "Years of constant tuning. No one ever gave me a roadmap. I just built what worked." "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you." He leaned in. "We're preparing to overhaul our entire infrastructure. We've grown fast, too fast, honestly. The off-the-shelf system we bought 3 years ago was fine when we had 20 properties. But now, with 70 and more coming, it's buckling. Crashes during peak hours, slow response times, integrations falling apart." I nodded. I'd heard this story before. "We don't want another prefab solution," he continued. "We want something built to scale, something custom, modular, reliable, and secure. Something like what you built." "That kind of system takes time," I said, "and buy-in from leadership. You'd have both." He didn't hesitate. "I want you to come on board as our chief systems architect. Full autonomy to design from scratch. You'll get the team you need, the documentation support, and the authority to say no when someone tries to take shortcuts." I was quiet for a moment, weighing the offer. "I assume the compensation reflects the scale of the challenge?" Lawrence smiled. 20% higher than what you were earning at Veltria, full benefits, stock options, and no Graham Vickers breathing down your neck. I chuckled. That's worth a bonus on its own. He sipped his coffee and studied me. So? Interested? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the months ahead. Clean slates, smart engineers, no legacy code to untangle, and most of all, respect. They weren't just hiring me for what I'd built. They were trusting me to build something better. I am, I said finally, but on one condition. Name it. We do it right. From day one. Full documentation, cross-training, and no single point of failure. I'm not repeating the mistakes I was forced into. Lawrence reached across the table and shook my hand again. Agreed. That afternoon, I called Elaine from the car. She answered on the first ring. Well, she asked. They made an offer, I said. A good one. Her voice softened. You deserve it. Maybe I did. Or maybe I just needed to be somewhere that valued the things I spent years building, things most people never saw until they stopped working. Meanwhile, Veltria's situation continued to deteriorate. Alan kept me updated through the occasional text. Next message. Still no fix. They hired some legacy recovery consultants, expensive ones, but they're struggling to make sense of your systems. The portal's still down, payment errors everywhere. I didn't respond. I had moved on. Not out of spite, but survival. A week into my new role at Devlin, Graham called again. This time I picked up. Victor, he began, his voice strained. Please. This is getting serious. We've lost access to 3 months of payment records. Tenants are complaining. The consultants say they need your insight on the database structure. I'm under contract now, I said. Exclusive. I can't help you. We'll double what they're paying. Just give us 2 days. It's not about the money. Then what is it? Revenge? I paused. For a moment, I considered what to say. Then I spoke with deliberate calm. No, Grum. I'm not enjoying watching you struggle, but you made a decision. You decided my experience wasn't worth the cost. Now you're learning what that actually meant. He was silent. Then came the pitch. The board wants to bring you back. Full salary, signing bonus, whatever you need. For a flicker of a second, I felt something close to satisfaction, but it faded quickly. Going back would solve nothing. The same people who once discarded me would still be there, waiting for the next opportunity to cut costs again. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I've made a commitment to a company that values doing things right. His tone hardened. You know, there could be legal implications if we find you intentionally made the system difficult to maintain. Non-compete clauses, intellectual property questions. There was the inevitable threat. I didn't flinch. The system is exactly how it was when you denied my request for a documentation team, I replied evenly. Every line of code belongs to Veltria as per my contract. I've taken nothing with me except my experience. Feel free to have your lawyers contact mine. Then I hung up. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something deeper, the anger I hadn't let myself feel until that moment. He wasn't just questioning my ethics. He was accusing me of sabotage. After everything I'd built, at Devlin, things were different. I was building it all again, but this time with support. Proper documentation, scheduled code reviews, real QA, a team of engineers who wanted to learn instead of replace. We weren't just solving problems, we were preventing them. And I had no intention of ever going back. It only got worse. Despite hiring a high-priced consulting firm that specialized in legacy system recovery, Veltria couldn't get the system stable. They managed to patch a few critical failures, just enough to get the tenant portal limping along, but the underlying infrastructure was fraying at every seam. Errors piled up. Requests didn't route properly. The data got misfiled. Entire records vanished from the payment queue. Alan kept texting me updates every few days, each one more troubling than the last. Text message? Still a mess. The system's half alive, like Frankenstein. Consultants say they don't know how your backup routines work. Nothing's syncing. Hey, I didn't reply. Then one afternoon, I looked up from my desk at Devlin and saw someone standing just outside my new office holding a familiar laptop bag. Alan, he smiled nervously. Got time for lunch? We walked to a deli down the street and took a corner booth. It was the first time I'd seen him since leaving Veltria. He looked exhausted. Eyes tired, posture sagging, but more than that, he looked disillusioned. It's worse than you think, he said, keeping his voice low despite the chatter around us. They've lost historical data going back 3 years. Some of the backups are corrupted. The consultants think the entire payment database might have to be rebuilt. I nodded slowly, unsurprised. The backup process I had implemented included strict redundancy checks, time-stamped encryption protocols, and security triggers that disabled access if specific sequences weren't followed. It was designed that way, not to confuse people, but to protect sensitive tenant data from tampering or improper handling. Graham didn't understand any of it, Alan continued, and he didn't want to. He hesitated before lowering his voice further. I found something while helping the consultants. I was digging through the system logs and email archives, trying to trace what went wrong. That's when I saw it. Saw what? I asked. He pulled out his laptop, opened a folder, and turned the screen toward me. Email chains. Dozens of them. Between Graham and the board, memos titled things like Legacy Staff Optimization Plan and Q2 Cost-Saving Projections Engineering Depth. In the middle of one email, my name was explicitly mentioned. Yeah, Graham's email. Hale's systems are overly complicated. He's made himself indispensable by design. Replacing him with younger engineers will reduce our tech overhead by at least $1 million, 0 cents, annually. I scrolled silently. It was all there. The plan to eliminate me, the timelines, the justifications. Graham had convinced the board that I was an obstacle, not an asset. That my work was a liability, not a foundation. That my presence was a cost, not a value. He planned this months in advance, Alan said. He even had a transition schedule laid out. Before he told you about the quarterly check-in, would you say anything? Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Some part of me had known. The cold professionalism, the fake surprise at my calm reaction. It had all been theater. There's more, Alan said. He raised an eyebrow. The private equity firm, they're planning to sell Veltria. That's why Graham was hired. He wasn't there to improve operations. He was there to make the numbers look better before they offload the company. And suddenly it all made sense. The resistance to documentation. The dismissal of internal expertise. The push to replace experienced staff with cheaper hires. They weren't building a future. They were staging a performance. Why are you telling me this? I finally asked. Alan closed the laptop gently. Because I quit yesterday, he said, and I'm not the only one. Half the IT department's already gone. The consultants say restoring full functionality might take 6 months, maybe more. He looked at me seriously. And because Veltria's biggest client, Westbrook Properties, they're thinking about jumping ship. They've lost faith in the system. So that caught my attention. Westbrook represented nearly 30% of Veltria's revenue. If they pulled out, it wouldn't just be a technical failure. It would be a financial one. What are you going to do now? I asked. Alan smiled faintly. Honestly, I was hoping the Velen might be hiring database administrators. That evening, I brought the matter to Lawrence. Alan wants to join the team, I said. We'll need someone like him soon. Hire him, Lawrence said without hesitation. If he worked with you, I'd trust him. We were building something new, something that would last, and it would be built by people who understood why that mattered. Later that night, my phone rang again. This time, Graham didn't sound like a CTO. He sounded like someone on the edge of collapse. Victor, he said, voice shaky. Please, Westbrook is threatening to pull out of their contract. The board is furious. They're questioning everything. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, keeping my voice even. We need your help. Name your price. It's not about price, I replied. There was a long pause. Then he asked, You knew this would happen, didn't you? You knew exactly what would fail and when. No, Graham, I said. I just knew what I had built and what it takes to maintain it. I tried to share that knowledge. Repeatedly, ended the call. No triumph, no anger, just a clear sense of closure. Some lessons don't stick until the damage is already done. 2 months into my role at Devlin, things were moving fast. We'd finalized the core design of our new infrastructure, onboarded a small team of engineers, and begun internal testing on a modular property management system that was fast, flexible, and most importantly, well documented. Then came the call. Lawrence summoned me to his office. I walked in expecting another design review or hiring discussion. Instead, he looked up from his monitor and said, "I just got off the phone with Jeffrey Westbrook." I paused. The name carried weight of CEO of Westbrook Properties, Veltria's largest clients and arguably one of the most influential property groups in the Northeast. "They're terminating their contract with Veltria next month," Lawrence continued. "He wants to know if we can handle their portfolio." I sat down slowly. Westbrook managed over 10,000 residential units, taking them on would more than double Devlin's operations overnight. "We're not ready," I said honestly. "The new system is only halfway built." Lawrence leaned forward. "Jeffrey's desperate. The system outages at Veltria are affecting tenant retention and public perception. He says he's willing to fund an infrastructure expansion on our side, and he's given us 12 weeks. I exhaled, calculating in my head. "We'll need at least 3 senior engineers, dedicated server capacity, and a fast-track migration framework. Even then, it's going to be tight." "Think we can pull it off?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But if we don't try, someone else will." That night, I didn't sleep much. I stayed up sketching architecture diagrams, data migration pathway, stress testing modules in my head, and outlining contingency plans. By morning, I had a proposal, a hybrid rollout that would onboard Westbrook in 3 waves, minimizing disruption while allowing for modular testing in live environments. When I presented it, Lawrence read through the plan carefully. His brow furrowed slightly when he reached the documentation phase. "We've added 3 weeks here just for training and documentation." "It's non-negotiable," I said. That's where Veltria failed. "We document everything. No exceptions, no black boxes. We train the whole team. No single point of failure." Lawrence nodded slowly. "Understood. We'll do it your way. It'll work immediately." Devlin hired 5 new engineers within a week, including 2 who had just left Veltria. Alan built a custom migration tool to translate Veltria's legacy data into our new schema. We split up new cloud environments for testing. Every Friday, we hold system integrity drills simulating outages and failure recovery. By week 10, we were ready for the first rollout. 2,000 units in Western New York, Westbrook's smallest region. If it worked, the rest would follow. The day before deployment, Lawrence called me into the conference room. I assumed it was a final checklist meeting. Instead, I found a tall man in a tailored overcoat waiting beside him. "Jeffrey Westbrook." "Victor," he said, offering his hand. "Lawrence has told me a lot about you." "All good, I hope," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. He smiled. He says, "You've built something that doesn't break every time a new property is added. That would be a nice change." "That's the plan," I said. Jeffrey studied me for a moment. "I hear you used to work at Veltria." I nodded, not sure where this was going. "They're in trouble," he said. "Private equity wants to sell, but no one's biting. Especially not after we leave." Lawrence added, "There is one potential buyer." Jeffrey glanced at him, then looked back at me. "Devlin Systems." The room went quiet for a second. I looked at both men, reading the implication. "If we make the offer," Lawrence said carefully, "we'll need someone who knows both systems, someone who can lead the integration." "You were asking if I'd be willing," I said slowly. Lawrence nodded. "Only if the deal goes through, and only if you're comfortable." Thought about it. The irony was almost poetic. Veltria had fired me without a second thought. Now their largest client was coming with me, and their survival depended on a company I now helped lead. "I'd be willing," I said, "but there's one condition. Never. We do it right. This time, everything gets documented, everything gets tested. We train people, we build systems that last." Lawrence smiled. "Agreed." As I walked back to my office, I didn't feel revenge or vindication, just clarity. The kind that comes when you've earned a second chance to do something the right way without compromise. 6 months after my first conversation with Jeffrey Westbrook, it was official. Devlin Systems had acquired Veltria Housing. The once proud company that had dismissed my contributions was now ours, for less than a quarter of the valuation it held when I was terminated. And the sign out front had already changed. Where it once read Veltri Housing, it now said Dublin Integrated Property Management. I stood in the lobby of the old headquarters, the place where I had spent nearly 2 decades of my life. Everything looked the same on the surface. Same tile floors, same bland corporate artwork. But the air felt different. Not happier, lighter. Lawrence and I walked the halls, greeting the employees who were staying through the transition. Some looked away when they saw me, a few managed polite nods, and others, those who had worked closely with me over the years, offered faint smiles of recognition. Not joy, not shame, just acknowledgement. Graham, of course, was gone. So was most of the executive team that had approved my departure. The board had pushed them out in the wake of Veltria's collapse. Only Justin Bayview remained, working as a transitional consultant, mostly to keep relationships with legacy clients intact. When we reached the server room, the one I had designed and overseen for so long, I stopped just outside the glass walls. Inside, I saw the blinking lights of racks I had hand-selected, the network switches, load balancers, and physical drives that once ran my custom-built infrastructure. It was a strange feeling, seeing something so familiar, but knowing I would never maintain it again. "Want to go in?" Lawrence asked. I shook my head. "No need. We're migrating everything soon anyway." In the main conference room, the remaining Veltria staff had gathered. Lawrence introduced me formally. "This is Victor Hale," he said. "Many of you already know him. He designed and maintained the core systems that ran this company for nearly 2 decades. He's now your Chief Integration Officer, and he'll be leading the technical transition as we unify our systems." I stood in front of him, not with authority, but with purpose. "I'm not here to say, 'I told you so.' I said plainly. What matters now is building something that works, not just for today, but for the long haul. We're going to migrate carefully, document thoroughly, and train everyone, not just a few. No one will be left behind because of cost cutting. Those days are over." There was silence, then a few nods. They understood. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Over the next several weeks, the transition unfolded. Bit by bit, we ported Veltria's surviving data into Devlin's new architecture. Alan's migration tools worked better than we could have hoped, transforming corrupted tables into clean, readable formats. We rebuilt the portal from the ground up. Every module was annotated and every dependency was tracked. For the first time, the system had real transparency. A year after the acquisition, Devlin Integrated Property Management became the largest property management firm in the North. We had absorbed Veltria's clients, staff, and systems. Except this time, we built everything to endure. Nothing was undocumented, nothing was improvised. And for the first time in my career, I had the full support of leadership to build it right. One crisp autumn morning, I walked into my new office, smaller than my old one at Veltria, but somehow more fitting. It wasn't about space, it was about clarity. I had one final meeting scheduled with Lawrence. "The board approved your proposal," he said as I sat down. "The technical education division launches next quarter. You'll have full autonomy, curriculum, instructors, everything." I smiled deeply. That had been my only request after the integration. Not a promotion, not more money, but the creation of a department focused on passing on the kind of knowledge most companies fail to preserve. A place to teach systems thinking, architecture fundamentals, and why shortcuts always cost more in the end. "Thank you," I said. "No, Victor," Lawrence replied. "Thank you. You didn't just rebuild our technology, you rebuilt our culture." Later that afternoon, I packed up my integration office. This time there was no cardboard box, no hurried exit, just a quiet shift from one purpose to the next. As I was leaving, Justin Bayou appeared in the doorway. "Got a minute?" he asked. We stepped outside into the courtyard. "My father asked about you," he said after a moment. "He's retired in Florida now, fishing a lot, but he still keeps an eye on the company. When he heard you were back," in a manner of speaking, he was glad. "How's Harold doing?" I asked. "He's good," Justin smiled. "He always said letting you go would be the biggest mistake Veldry could make." Nodded. Turns out he was right. Justin looked out across the lawn, pensive. "I learned something from all of this. Value isn't always visible until it's gone." We stood in silence for a while. As I drove home along the lake, trees flaming red and gold on either side, I reflected on his words and on the road that had brought me here. Not revenge, not redemption, hips, restoration, of dignity, of discipline, of systems built to last. And the people who knew how to build them, the transition was complete. Every property, every client, every line of data migrated, stabilized, and running under the new infrastructure. Our system had scaled without breaking thanks to the principles I had insisted on from the beginning: clarity, documentation, testing, and redundancy. We didn't chase perfection. We built for permanence. A year had passed since the Veltree acquisition, and the new Devlin integrated property management system was now live across all regions. What once ran on fragile patches and overworked servers now operates on a platform built to anticipate failure and recover from it seamlessly. Tenants were satisfied. Clients had regained trust, and our engineering team no longer relied on whispered knowledge passed down in hallways. Everything was written, shared, reviewed, and taught. That morning, the leaves along Lake Ontario had turned brilliant gold and crimson. I parked outside the new office building, not as a systems architect or integration lead, but as the head of a newly formed division: technical education and systems training. The board had approved my proposal without debate. Lawrence had made sure of that. They understood what I had learned the hard way, what Valkyrie never did. If you don't preserve knowledge, it disappears the moment someone walks out the door. And when that person is the only one holding the map, the system fails. Always. Inside, I was greeted by a handful of new hires, young engineers fresh from college, nervous and excited. They were here not just to write code, but to learn how to build something meant to last, how to ask the right questions, how to plan for failure before it happens, how to recognize that their job wasn't just to ship features, but to create foundations. We didn't teach buzzwords. We taught architecture. Later that afternoon, I stopped by my new classroom, more of a lab, really. Clean whiteboards, laptops stacked, a mock server rack in the corner, the kind of space I'd once dreamed of. Back when I was alone at Veltria, duct taping fixes at midnight and wondering if anyone cared. Now I wasn't just maintaining systems. I was growing the people who would build them. As I packed up some materials for the first training cycle, my phone buzzed. A message from Alan, who now led database strategy across all Devlin properties. Text message: new hire asked why we have 3 levels of backup redundancy. I told him because the guy who designed it was once burned badly by a power failure in a snowstorm. He nodded and started taking notes. SMS. Later that week, Justin Bayou stopped by the office again. My father asked about you, he said. He remembers the day you took down that modem and built our first router from scrap parts. Said you were the best decision he ever made, not just because of what you built, but because of how you cared. I didn't know what to say. Some moments don't need a reply. As Justin turned to leave, he added, he also said one more thing: systems can be replaced, but integrity, once lost, costs more than anyone realizes. That night, driving home along the lakeshore, I thought about the systems we build. Not just the digital ones, but the human ones. The habits, the cultures, the lessons passed or ignored. I thought about how close I had come to disappearing quietly, my work discarded, my experience dismissed. But instead, I had moved forward. Not with vengeance, but with vision. I had built something better, and in doing so, I had proven, without shouting, without pride, that doing things right the first time is always worth it. Sometimes the best response to being underestimated isn't proving people wrong. It's building something so strong that they can't afford to make the same mistake again.